So when you hear the name Martin St. Louis today, you're probably thinking of the Montreal Canadiens head coach, and you would be right in thinking so. Another picture that might come to your mind is when he played for the Tampa Bay Lightning and him lifting the Stanley Cup over his head. Martin St. Louis didn't always have it so easy, even though he had an impressive college career with the University of Vermont in the mid-90s. He was not selected in the NHL draft, mainly because of his stature of only being 5'8". His career, especially in the early days, was littered with discouragement after discouragement.
Hi, I'm Scott Schwertly.
And I'm Dale Dameron.
And we are mental performance coaches at GritBase. And at GritBase, we create customized mental performance strategies to help hockey players just like you become more confident, calm, and mentally tough so they can succeed on and off the ice. And we're also the hosts of this podcast, Hockey Combat Mindset, which is all about helping you win the war in your mind so you can become a stronger and more capable hockey player. Welcome. We're glad you're here.
We are definitely glad you're here for episode number 7. And Scott, it's been a couple weeks. I know we missed last week, unfortunately.
I know. We both have been down and out. I know I just got over a pretty bad cold. I know you've been battling the same thing.
Yep. I'm going to try my best not to have like congestion too badly. If we had recorded, we were planning on recording earlier this week. And I mean, I don't know. Maybe I do want to know what my voice would have sounded like had we done it that day, because it was I was pretty miserable state for sure.
Yeah, it's been and, take those colds coupled with just busy work weeks, and I know you did some travel with family. Lots going on our calendars.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think that's a good thing because it's the off season right now. So this is the time, and we're like players, right? Like we're trying to get all of our travel in while there's nothing going on. We're trying to get our summer vacations in, but yeah, it was. Good vacation with the family, but good to be back in it. And, I've missed being down here recording.
Yeah, agreed. It's nice to finally get back into a rhythm. I'm glad to be back into the swing of things. So it feels good.
For sure. All right. Well, with that, today we are going to be going over overcoming discouragement. So some strategies for hockey players in handling discouragement. And you know what? Let's get into that on the other side.
Well, welcome back, everybody. Today we have an exciting topic, which is actually discouragement.
Oh, exciting as in like negatively exciting? I don't know. It's not super positive.
Yeah, that's true. I'm at least excited to talk about the strategies around it, but I don't know if the topic itself is that is that exciting or encouraging.
I like that better. You like the positive outcome that can come from discouragement.
Yes, yeah.
All right,
there we go. That's probably a better explanation for it.
All right.
But Dale, I don't know if I've actually told you the story. I know you are very familiar with my entrepreneurial background. Like I love creating businesses. It's the whole reason, we've got GritBase. But back in my 20s, I don't think I've shared this story with you before. I actually, when I thought about creating one of my very first businesses, got super passionate about it. I kind of got, I guess, maybe overzealous and started creating the logo, the website.
Hey, you were feeding off of it, right? I mean, you have to do that. I mean, I will say that's one thing I've learned from you is that almost like just lean into it, have some excitement from it. Even if it doesn't come out of or anything come out of it, you had fun in the process.
Yeah, right. And for me, like being an entrepreneur, I love to I like the feeling of starting something.
Yeah.
I think I tend to get bored once the thing's already created.
Yeah.
So I was living off that passion. So yeah, again, I kind of got overexcited and started investing time, money, even in creating all these different things. And then
that's great.
Yeah.
I feel like we should just end the story right here. It's positive. It's happy.
Yeah. We haven't even talked about discouragement yet.
Yeah.
So once I got everything in order and what I thought was sort of in a row and ready to go, it came to the point where I actually needed to buy inventory.
Okay.
And this is where I knew I mean, I have an MBA, but at this point I didn't really know a lot about running a business and what was all involved.
Right.
And so I realized, well, to actually get this company off the ground, I have to buy inventory. And so I reached out to my dad and said, hey, this is the idea. This is the company. This is what I want to do. This is where I need to buy inventory from. And so
he said,
he said, hold on. And so, yeah, he basically crunched the numbers for me. And I found out within probably like a 48-hour window, once he finally put the numbers together, that at a minimum, I needed to somehow gather up about $500,000. And this is like 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So we're actually probably more like 20, 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Really aging myself here. So, I mean, that was a lot of money back in the day, particularly at this time. I think I was only maybe 24, 25 years old.
Yeah.
And that's not even counting all the expenses of, if I wanted to bring on employees, if I wanted to do sort of any sort of marketing.
This is literally just startup costs.
just buying inventory. And man, all that excitement, all that passion, I mean, it was essentially killed overnight. And if you're talking about discouragement, that was a true sign of discouragement where,
right.
In this case, I mean, I felt like I was over my head. I felt disheartened. I was frustrated. I had no more fuel in the gas tank at this point. And, but yeah, it's, since we're going to be talking about discouragement, my brain just always goes back to that moment of just how everything, all the life in me essentially just got
sucked
drained.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, as you're talking about that, it kind of reminds me of what we opened with Martin St. Louis, right? I know we mentioned it like very briefly, but he played all 4 years at the University of Vermont. He's a, basically an all-star college player, averaging between usually around 33 to 36 games. He had no less than 51 points, and that was his freshman year.
That's crazy.
He had 85 points in the season, his junior year. So you think about a player like that, promising career. He's got all the excitement. He's like, man, I am going pro.
Yeah.
And just like you starting your business up, right? He's like, this is my dream.
Yep.
And I'm going pro. It's going to happen. And then he doesn't get drafted.
Yeah.
Like, I would only imagine that he was probably feeling the same way you did, disheartened, frustrated, all the emotions coming in. Right?
Oh, yeah. Well, and the other sad thing is, I love that we're using Martin St. Louis as an example here, because that discouragement did end there. Like, if you fast forward, even eventually he did get in the NHL, but that frustration just continued, because I know, like, particularly he was with the Calgary Flames for a short bit.
Yep.
And could not secure a permanent spot on that roster.
No.
So it's just...
He actually jumped between, in just 2 years, he was actually between the IHL, the AHL, and only played 13 games for the Flames that first season. The second year in 98 in the NHL. So he jumped all over the place. And I mean, I can't argue with it. In the 13 games, he only scored 1 goal, 1 assist. I can imagine he's probably playing at like the fourth line, low third line.
Yeah.
He's getting those, kind of like, junk minutes. And for a 5'8" player, especially in that NHL, that was very hard.
Yeah.
Because you just want to make sure you didn't get killed.
Yeah, exactly.
By the way, before we go any further, I don't want to put any more shade on 5'8" people. As one myself, you can do a lot of great things at 5'8", and I look up to players like Martin St. Louis and Steve Solon for that reason, because they proved that you can do that.
Yes, I mean, it is doable, right? Yeah,
for sure. So discouragement, right? You felt it, he felt it. A lot of players feel it, right? And particularly in hockey, I think it's very easy to have it pop up almost on a game-to-game basis. It could pop up at any time.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about Martin, for example, I think if we were able to sort of dissect his mindset, particularly during maybe his time with the Calgary Flames, or even when he wasn't selected to the NHL draft, but it's probably a better example to look at maybe his time with the Calgary Flames. I would think in that moment, he probably embodies the typical attributes of what discouragement is. And so if we were to sort of unpack that for you guys, I mean, discouragement's going to come from things like losing games, obviously not meeting your own personal expectations. In this case, him not scoring the goals that he wants to score, knows that he's capable of scoring. It's, making mistakes. It's, maybe feeling unsupported. In this case, maybe he feels like his friends or his family are abandoning him. Maybe he's abandoning himself. But these are all the components of discouragement, which, we're human, right? They're going to get the best of us. And if you can't kind of get control of it, it will get the best of you.
Yeah, this actually kind of reminds me of when we talked about stress and outside factors too, right? Discouragement can really be a deadly force that really negatively impacts your performance on the ice, off the ice as well. But of course, here on this podcast, we're looking more towards your performance on the ice. But your motivation goes down the spiral of drain of emotions and outcomes. I mean, I love the word spiral because if you don't, like you said, if you don't work to fight against it, it will pull you down. And honestly, it will get to a point where your coach will notice it. Your teammates are going to notice it. And hopefully they're going to look for ways to help you out with it. But of course, a lot of it all starts within yourself, right? You can't get better unless you're ready to admit that you have a problem.
Yeah, right. It's I think back onto my triathlon days, which I know I've alluded to a few times here in this podcast. But, I can think back on specific races that, maybe I picked up an 8-week training program or a 12-week training program. And, you in that moment, in that season of your life, you dedicate your life to it, right? So you're waking up early, you're doing the runs, you're doing the swims, the bike rides, you're watching your nutrition, you're watching your sleep. Race day comes, and race day is not what you imagined, right? You're the time that you think you're going to cross that finish line, you're 5 minutes off, you're 10 minutes off. Maybe you have a DNF, you don't have a finish sort of thing. I've had several races like that, or even in hockey. I've had several games where I've invested time working on my stick handling, my skating, whatever. I show up for the game and I'm not performing the way I thought I could or the way I should. And
sometimes it can take just one factor.
Yeah.
As you're talking about that, I was thinking of I picture as playing wing, I can in my mind still picture these games where I feel like I did everything right. I played a great game. I put my A+, mental attitude into it. I was in the right spots all the time. I was putting shots on net, but I missed that one shot at the end of the game.
Yeah.
Or never got a point, right? So in my mind, there's a discouragement factor that's coming in because you're like, yeah, you played a great game, but you didn't finish, right?
Yeah.
The team didn't win, and if you had scored that goal, maybe that would have been the game winner, right?
Yeah.
And so you can play amazing. You can have your training for your race. You can do amazing, and then what if you have a cramp in your leg and you don't finish?
Something, you can't control.
It's just it's there easily.
Yeah, and then that deadly force that you're talking about. Well, what does that end up resulting in? Well, even though you're, like you said, you're in all the right spots, you're getting shots on net, you could still walk away from that game with maybe a lack of confidence. You may have decreased effort, or maybe as the week progresses and you're thinking about the next game, maybe you're not going to care as much this upcoming week because you're somewhat demotivated, or
you change your training because you think, oh, well, it didn't work that way.
Yeah.
So I obviously need to change up and do something different.
Or you're like me and you buy a new hockey stick because you think having a different lie or a different flex will make all the difference.
I really wish you were left-handed so I could start using your sticks that you don't use anymore, but it's all good.
And then where it really gets dangerous is where you start getting into negative self-talk or and just allowing these feelings of frustration or low self-esteem to kick in, which is not the path that you want to take, right?
No.
It's the whole point of this episode is we really want to acknowledge that, okay, discouragement is real. It happens. It gets the best of us. But what separates the great players or the great athletes from the good ones are the ones that can acknowledge that discouragement happens, but then can actually deploy strategies and techniques to minimize it.
That's right.
Yeah, or eliminate it.
Yep. And you know what the greatest thing about this podcast is? We have 5 things to go over that's going to help you overcome discouragement.
Exactly.
So let's start it off. Number 1, easy one. I feel like we talk about this one a lot. Set realistic goals. Okay,
Yes.
We talk about goal setting, but we also want to make sure that focus on that second word there, realistic goals, okay? So don't sit there and say, I need a hat trick every game.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe as a certain player, you can do that.
Yeah.
Maybe if you're playing in a league down or you're just a superstar in the NHL, maybe you can do that. But that isn't necessarily a realistic goal. Maybe your realistic goal should be, I'm going to get 2 shots on goal.
Yeah.
I'm going to always be in the right position. I'm going to back check faster than anyone else on my team. Something as easy as that, it's the process of goal setting that you want to make sure that it is obtainable, right? Now, don't make it easy. Don't make it like, well, I want to get 1 shot on goal every single game. Oh, look at that. I did that in the first minute, first shift. I'm done. you want to make sure that it is achievable, but also that it is a stretch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you nailed it right on the head there with it being realistic. It has to be realistic. You can't, I mean, got to be a little bit lofty where you have something to strive for. But like you said as well, it can't be too easy where you can knock it off your list,
Yeah. So one thing I always thought that from a previous job I was in, our goals that were set for us, now granted there was a numbers business, right? It was sales. And so it's very numbers oriented. But our goals were always set at 105% of your previous goal.
Yeah.
So not looking for a huge growth, but you're looking for growth. When I used to train people in that job, I used to always tell them, hey, that's a numbers goal, but set that as your goal in other avenues too that are not numbers related. So if you spoke to this many customers in a day, well, look for 105%. Add that little extra 5% onto it. I think that's a great obtainable goal that honestly just brings out growth naturally.
Yeah.
Because you're never going to be stale and just stay in the same spot, or hopefully not, regress as well.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. It reminds me a lot too of James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits, and
great book.
He's all about, the 1%, right? So if you can get better 1% every single day, it's not this, again, lofty goal where you got to become this completely different person. It's just that little sort of small amount of growth every single day. And that's where you're really going to see the big gains. Because I know for me, like one of my big goals that I always try to do that looking back has been unrealistic is, I love to read books. And so a lot of times I'll set the goal if I want to read 52 books in 52 weeks.
52 years? 2 weeks. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. And I've only done it 1 year. And that was great. I mean, all the stars aligned and I was able to make that happen. And I usually have that as my goal every year. And I just know that it's not, it's usually not going to happen. So,
in a perfect world, maybe in a vacuum, I think you could do it easily.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of other things in your life.
Yes. I've got a career.
Family.
I've got 3 kids.
Yeah.
It's just,
Exactly.
it's not realistic. And so obviously a better goal for myself would be maybe 1 book a month, maybe 2 books a month. But the idea here that we're trying to convey is when you set these realistic goals, and again, assuming they're realistic, it's going to push off discouragement, because I know if I set in my head I got to read 52 books in 52 weeks, and now we're week 7 of the year and I'm behind, like all of a sudden I'm going to start to feel discouraged. I'm going to start to feel not worthy, or I'll start to feel like a loser, or I'm not ambitious enough, or whatever it may be, or I'm terrible with time management, or I'm terrible with energy management. And that's not the script that you need in your head. And you don't need to unnecessarily welcome discouragement into your life, because if you do start setting unrealistic goals, you're opening the door for discouragement to walk in.
For real. And when you're talking about that too, you're like you said, you're building that positive momentum, right? Checking things off a list. I love doing that.
Yeah.
And each time you do it, it's building on one thing. It's a victory, right? And even if it's a small victory, it's a victory. One of the most famous inspirational speeches that I know that I've listened to was from the Navy SEAL, from the Admiral William McRaven.
Oh, yeah.
The Make Your Bed speech, right?
Yeah.
And I don't make my bed every morning, so don't get me wrong. But I do pull the sheets up. So, I mean, maybe that is making your bed, right? I'm not perfectly putting it like a hotel room. However, if you don't know about this speech, I would highly recommend you go to YouTube and go look at it. It is one of the most inspirational speeches. It was given at a graduation ceremony years back. But yeah, he talks about make your bed every morning, right? Start out with the simple. It's a victory. You've already won the first challenge of the day.
Yeah.
And you're setting yourself up for that positive momentum to hit the rest of your goals throughout the day, no matter how big or small. And I think one thing he ends on too is when you come back to your bed at the end of the day, when you're tired and you've succeeded, hopefully at that point, your bed's already made and it's ready for you to get back into it.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought that one. Brought that up because it's a great talk. It's a great book. Yeah, huge fan. In fact, I actually, in my book, What's Your Presentation Persona, I have a whole, like half a chapter dedicated to that speech.
Oh, really?
It's so profound. So yeah, highly recommend you guys, listen to that speech. It's a good one.
It is. And I know that we love our Navy SEALs on this too. So
yes.
we've mentioned them before on the podcast before, but, Yeah, so I mean that's the key thing there, right? Set realistic goals, build that momentum, build that confidence. It will help you hopefully avoid discouragement, but it also will help you get out of discouragement if you're in that pit as well. Number 2, second point, stay focused on the process. So we've talked about this many times. Hockey, just like the game of life, is a series of up and downs, right? I always think that hockey is if you just look at a hockey game, every shift you take in that game, it's like a roller coaster ride, right? You just want to make sure that the peaks are a lot more frequent than the valleys. But like anything, when we use that roller coaster analogy, use that momentum from the valleys to carry yourself up the next peak, right? And that's the key here, is just keep that focus throughout the whole game.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, one thing that I find amazing, and this experience that I'm about to share, it just enhances my respect for the sport. So, I played 2 years of high school hockey, revisited the sport in my late 20s, played, I think, 2-3 seasons of like beer league, men's league hockey, gave it up, revisited it again when I was like 38, played half a season, gave it up. And then Dale, you reintroduced me back into it.
You're welcome for this last one.
Yeah, at the age of, I think I was 44 when you reintroduced it back to me.
Yep.
But anyway, I've been around it. I've been exposed to it. And so I've always thought I've been a decent skater. And so this past, I think it was November of 2023, I decided to actually hire a skating coach. Just doing one lesson a week. My daughter's a figure skater, so she does figure skating usually twice a week. And so I thought, you know what, if my daughter's doing this, why don't I just give it a shot? I'm sure I can get better. And so looking back on this, again, I started in November with lessons. I thought surely by like January, February, I'd be like the next Connor McDavid, right? Because like I'm hiring a skating coach, I'm spending this money, I'm investing this time that, just a few lessons, learning some tips and tricks and getting this thing under my belt. Like I'd be like amazing, right? No. Like, fast forward, I mean, we're recording this now in July of 2024. So I've been at it now for
3/4 of a year.
Yeah. And I'm better. But I'm not great. And it's just it's a friendly reminder to me of really how difficult the sport is, that like you said, they're going to have these peaks and valleys. You're going to have these plateaus. You're going to have these ups and downs. Right. And this sport, there's so much required of it to really achieve mastery. And I'm, just in skating itself, like I'm learning so much about so many different drills and techniques with, your with edge work and all that stuff, but it's crazy to just know how much is involved. And again, it's a reminder to me that in this case, trust the process.
Right. And
I know in my own personal athletic journey, I've seen these ups, and I've seen a lot of plateaus. And, as we talked about, I think we even mentioned this in the last episode, that you got to get comfortable in those plateaus. And if you can get through the plateau, eventually you'll see another peak. But all that to say, I think this sport, what I love about it so much is it is so complex. And it welcomes, it needs someone to respect the process, because there is so much to learn. Yep.
And going back to our story kind of in the podcast here, I can guarantee you Martin St. Louis was staying focused on the process during those 2 to 3 seasons that he was kind of bouncing back and forth. And you can actually see it if you look at his stats. He started, like I said, that 98-99 season with the Flames. He only had 2 points in 13 NHL games. However, in the AHL, he played 53 games. He scored 28 goals, 34 assists. So 62 points is pretty darn good, more than a point per game average. The next year, he kept the same pace basically in the AHL and played more games in the NHL. So it still didn't turn to a lot of points in the NHL yet, but he's staying focused on the process, right? He's not changing. I mean, he may have been changing a few things, but he's not changing, that he's a hockey player, and he's not changing his mindset of knowing, like, I'm working towards the ultimate goal, which is to be a superstar in the sport.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I'm glad you brought that up, because that is such an important part, is just, like you said, trust the process. Know that, like, even in my case, like, I trust my coach, and I trust that every little deposit that we make is building towards something better. And at the end of the day, yes, I'm a better skater today than I was 9 months ago. But again, it's about putting trust in the process. One thing that really stands out to me, to kind of sort of cement this thought is, I know, again, going back to triathlon, I remember specifically, like, I was in the middle of a very big, I think it was on a 21-week training schedule for my first full Ironman. And I remember I was doing all the work. I was putting in all the long rides, the long runs. But I remember one Saturday when I was supposed to do a 100-mile ride, I actually had a speaking engagement that morning. So I wasn't actually able to get on the road like at 7 a.m. or 6 a.m. like I normally do. And in fact, I didn't get on the road until like 2 p.m., 3 p.m. And, I'm scrambling to get this 100-mile ride in.
Right.
And, sun's starting to set.
I was about to say before the day ends.
Yeah. Sun's starting to set. And I'm like, I don't want to be riding in the dark. And so I called it quits at the 82-mile mark. And I remember calling my coach that day and being like, man, I'm so sorry, coach. Like, I tried to get the 100 in. I just couldn't. And he was like, chill. He's like, if you look at your calendar, if you look at your deposits, you have consistently hit every workout I've requested of you. Do not beat yourself up. There is no reason to be discouraged because you only got 82 of the 100, because on the grand, the big, grand scheme of things, whatever, you've actually done the work.
Yeah.
And that was a great reminder to me that, as long as you are, at that 90%, that 95%, and you're sticking to the process, there's no reason to be discouraged.
Yeah.
Because you've made the proper investments, and we're humans. Again, we're going to have time management issues. We're going to have energy management issues. It's all part of life, right?
And honestly, that story you told plays well into our third point too, which is control what you can control.
Yeah, exactly.
You had a speaking engagement that morning, right?
Yeah.
That was probably outside of your control. If you had control over it, you probably would have scheduled it at a different time
Yes.
so that you could have fit that bike ride in. But that was something that needed your attention, and you had to go do it. I can imagine during your training that you had plenty of weather effects that you didn't control.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
So there's just so many things outside of your control that you can't focus on. You can't say or beat yourself up about or get discouraged about, right? Martin St. Louis, after those seasons we talked about, he then didn't get re-signed by the Calgary Flames, and in 2000 he signed with the Tampa Bay Lightning. Now, most of us know the rest of the story, and we'll get to it here in a second. However, you can imagine going through this player's mind, okay, all right, here I go. I just finally trying to find my foothold still. Now I'm moving from Calgary, Alberta, all the way down to Tampa Bay, Florida.
So radical of a changes. Yeah.
Pretty much in and of itself.
Yeah.
So what does he have to do? Well, he can control his effort, his attitude, his preparation, and that's what he needed to focus on, right? He can't focus on that the humidity level has now risen all around him, right?
Yeah.
Or that he will never see snow again outside of what's on the ice rink.
Yeah.
He can only put his time or energy into what his control is over.
Yeah, exactly. And for all you hockey players out there that, maybe are at the men's league level like we are, or even maybe you're at more of an elite level or college level, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you can only control yourself, and you can't control your teammates. You can't control your coach. You can't control the refs. I mean, focus on what you can control. I mean, that at the end of the day, that's all you have power over. So so choose wisely with how you manage your thoughts, your emotions, and so forth.
And don't be one of those people that think you can control everything, because it's only going to lead to discouragement in of itself, on top of you're not going to make other people happy.
Yeah.
So, just roll with the punches, control your own self and what's in your office, and you'll be good to go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, again, I don't want to belabor triathlon, but yeah, I mean, again, many races where, the night before it's pouring down rain,
right,
and you're thinking, man, I just spent 12 weeks of my life preparing for this race, and it's going to rain tomorrow. And maybe it's cold, maybe it's a fall race, or it's nearing the end of summer, or the weather's changing a little bit. But it's yeah, I don't want to be doing a 50-mile bike ride racing with it cold, wet, slippery conditions. But at the end of the day, I can't control the weather, right? So I can either embrace it for what it is, mentally prepare myself and show up and give my best effort, or I could emotionally quit, right? And you don't want to do that. And so, again, can't control the other team. you can't control these other outside influences. So
I think I'm going to give some love. I love to give love to our goalies out there on a lot of our episodes.
Oh, yeah.
Never played the position. That's why I give so much love to it, because I never would play the position. But our goalies in the sport of ice hockey, they have to live in this point, right? Mm-hmm. Because there is so much in their position there is out of their control, right? We talked about how much the puck can bounce off people, right? It can bounce off objects, body parts, posts, pipes, crossbars, anything like that, right? But the goalie has to be set to what he sees, right? No matter what, if the shot's coming from the point, he is set to the shot. Mm-hmm. If it's coming low, he's gonna be set to the rebound potential that could come from it. However, if it goes off somebody or if it gets deflected by a stick in front of the net, that is out of his control. And that's where you're going to see a lot of goalies, especially at the top level, get beaten, right? But they can't get discouraged by that. They have to be able to focus and get right back into the game and focus on that next shot that they see coming their way, right? So, I mean, again, more love to our goalies out there because I feel like they just literally live in this box of control.
Well, in addition to that, I mean, I couldn't be a goalie either, just for the fact that you are solely dependent on others scoring on your behalf. And I know that's even like as a defenseman, I know that's something I have struggled with in my transition to that role, is where like I could have the best game as a defenseman and blocking shots, playing like a goalie, right? Like I'm keeping stuff out of our zone.
Right.
But if my wingers and centers are not scoring and are producing, it's like, well, that sucks.
Yeah. It's the frustration of letting in one goal and that being the 1-0
right?
loss, right?
Yeah. So I hate that feeling of dependency, but again, it's all part of this notion of again, only control what you control. You do your best and hope that's enough, right?
That's why we see the Quinn Hughes and the Roman Yossi's and the Cale Makars of the world just take it in their own hands and be like, you know what? My team's not scoring enough. I'm just going to do it on my own.
Yes, exactly.
Discover your hockey player type in just 3 minutes. Are you the tenacious bear or perhaps the agile cheetah? Introducing Primal Score, our free assessment to help you unleash your inner beast. It's time to take the limiter off your potential. Claim your edge by taking this fast and free assessment that's designed to help hockey players just like you achieve their full potential. Go to yourprimalscore.com to get your personalized results. Again, that's yourprimalscore.com.
All right, so 2 points left, and I don't want to get too negative here, but before we get into point number 4, I have a sad reality for you, Scott.
What's that?
You're gonna fail in life. I don't know if you knew that.
Oh, I'm living it now.
We all fail, right? We all make mistakes, and if you're like me, you're gonna let yourself down quite a bit too, because your expectations for yourself are just too high. You know what's worse than that? Sometimes you're gonna let your teammates down.
Oh yeah.
Or you're gonna let your coach down. Whatever. It doesn't matter, right? These things are gonna happen in life. Yeah. It's called life. But point number 4, you want to learn from your failure. And this is, I love this point, not because it's so negative, right? Like there's positivity, just like discouragement. There's positivity that comes out of it. But if I were to impact one lesson on my children, it's this one. Mm-hmm. Because I think what happens to a lot of people in sports and in life is that they don't learn from their failure. Everything happens in life for a reason. And when you get hit with a setback, when you have something that you failed on, that either you didn't do it the right way or someone else failed for you and it caused you to fail, right? Whatever that reason may be, you have to learn from it. And honestly, children are one of the best ones to learn from this on, because, you know, our toddlers, right, they fall down all the time when they're learning to walk. But they get back up and they try again. Maybe they don't try again right in the moment, but they try again. And that's the most important thing. Mm-hmm. And how do they learn how to walk? Well, they remember that the last time when they put their left foot in front of the right one, they fell down. So maybe I don't do that this time, right? So that's what you have to do as an adult. That's what you have to do as a hockey player, is look at what those setbacks were, what caused them, try to learn as much try to learn as much from it as you possibly can. And then that's the only way you're going to get better.
Yeah. It's, you know, when I think about my kids, you know, obviously mistakes are going to happen as you talked about, and I'm fine with my kids making mistakes as long as they learn from it. Exactly. And then they don't repeat that same mistake. Cause I think that's obviously where the growth happens. And I'm also, the same way. I haven't always been this way, but I'm getting better at giving myself grace that, okay, it's okay to fail. It's okay to make a mistake as long as I learn from it.
Right.
And I can, take a lesson and apply it and take a step forward in my life in whatever capacity that may be. So yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that's a very important lesson for us as hockey players, but even for those that are out there who are parents who are, fighting that battle every single day to make sure that you're, raising your kids in the right way.
Exactly. And like you said, and I love that you mentioned it, that's how you learned about your strengths and weaknesses, right? Is from that failure. It does provide a level of clarity. It tells you what you can endure, right? It makes you tougher. We always talk about when you get a cut on your skin rebuilds back, right? But there might be a scar left from where the tissue built back stronger than it was before to help prevent that from happening again. These things happen mentally too. They happen on your inside. I can only imagine right now here in July of 2024, what Connor McDavid's feeling, right?
Yeah.
It's what Matthew Tkachuk and the Florida Panthers felt last year at this time. They get so close to the Stanley Cup. McDavid even more so at Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final. It was a failure. If you think about it, every team that doesn't win is technically failed for the year of their ultimate goal. And but what is he going to learn from it? What is he going to pull from that for his experience going into this next season? And that is where an athlete like Connor McDavid, hopefully he'll learn from it.
Yeah.
But that's what sets them different is and gets them to that level that they're at, is that they don't just sit there and say, oh, well, I almost got it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, they continue going on and build off of it and get stronger.
Yeah. And I think there's also even a great story. You're talking about Connor McDavid. It's making me think of the Oilers. I could be totally butchering this because I'm not getting all my stats correct in my head. Maybe Dale, you'll remember, but I believe it was the season right before the Oilers won their championship in 84 or 85. They were, I believe, up against the New York Islanders potentially.
That would be potentially correct around that time period.
So all that to say, I think it was like maybe the 83 season. There was the Oilers, the Islanders. They made it to the Stanley Cup finals. The Oilers did not win. But anyway, I've heard the story through, I think it's through either Mark Messier or Wayne Gretzky, but they were talking about how I think they walked by the locker room, and in this case, if my memory is correct, it's the Islanders. When they were walking by the Islanders locker room, those guys looked way more beat up, way more exhausted, way more bloody. And they realized right in that moment of what it truly takes to actually win a Stanley Cup, that they weren't as bruised and battered as the Islanders. I think it's the Islanders, right?
I'm looking. I got it pulled up right here. So 1982-83, the Oilers lost in the Stanley Cup final. And I'm trying to see if I can find it real quick for you. I can't see actually who it was that they played against on that one, but I think you're right. It being around that time. Hopefully we're not.
Because I know the Islanders were pretty dominant in the 80s, so it makes me think it was them who could have been their opponent. If you guys know the answer to this, feel free to comment.
There was 4 years in a row that the Islanders won the Stanley Cup. It was their only 4 times they've won.
Okay.
But it was all 4 years in a row. They're the last team to do it 4 years in a row.
So it had to have been that 82, 83
It had to have been
season.
because then after that, it's great that you brought this story up because the Oilers lost that year in the final, and then they won the championship the next season, 1983-84. They won it again in 84-85, and if you actually go on, they won 5 championships in the span of the next 7 years.
Which is impressive. So all that to say, they learned from failure, right? They learned the work, the grit.
Or from the Islanders, you mean?
Yes, yeah. The Oilers, learned that from the Islanders of, what's required to win a championship, right?
Yep.
And so they obviously learned from that failure, right, where they were able to bounce back and have such that prolific, end of that decade. So there's lots to be said here when, again, you think about discouragement. Again, it's going to creep into your life. When is it going to creep in? It's going to creep in when you make mistakes. It's going to creep in when you have failures.
Yeah.
But you can reverse your fate by learning from it, growing from it, acknowledging it, and then moving on. We've talked a lot about having bad shifts where you can use words like reset or release, or I know Dale, yours is,
it's done.
Yeah, it's done. It's the idea of moving beyond, but at least gathering the lesson or the insight that you need to go one step further.
And if you don't do this, we talk about that spiral, you're only going to feed the spiral of discouragement. Because there's nothing I can think of that's more discouraging than continuing to fail the same way over and over and over again. Even if you're not aware of it, it's still feeding the discouragement factor, extensively.
Yeah. Well, what's that? I don't think it's Einstein, but they always change who's attributed to this quote, but it's the whole thing of when you do the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Like, it's
the definition of insanity.
Yeah. Right. It's kind of the same thing. So
point number 4, sad reality, right? Negative, right? We're going to fail, but you want to learn from that failure. Point number 5, however, we get very happy, right? So point number 5, our final point, stay positive. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, it sounds like really straightforward, and you can almost even say almost elementary-ish, but it's not. It's easy to talk about positivity and about having an optimistic outlook on things. But when you think about reality, like, how many people actually do it, right? Like, I think a lot of people do let discouragement get the best of them when they have a bad shift, when they have a bad game, when they have a bad season. Talk to those folks. You'll realize a lot of people are kind of pessimistic naturally.
Or like a fake sense of positivity. Yeah. Like, oh yeah, I'm having a great time out here. Like there's like sarcasm kind of built into it, right? But they think like, if I just keep saying it, it's going to happen. But yeah, you want to feel like that true positivity, that optimism that's going to feed into enthusiasm and like just feed into, it honestly kills discouragement. It's the positive outweighing the negative, and you just can't get caught up in the negative thinking while you're having fun. That's the main thing behind it.
Yeah. And you kind of already mentioned this already, but there's really kind of 3 key enemies, I would say, of discouragement. Enemy number 1 is optimism, right? It's having that positive outlook. It's reframing situations to have more of a sort of optimistic outlook. Enemy number 2 of discouragement is enthusiasm. So it's kind of a close cousin of optimism and positivity, but it's more about generating that sense of excitement in what you're doing and getting back to your roots. And then kind of another cousin of that is gratitude. It's the third enemy of discouragement, where if you can always come from a place of gratitude, a place of thankfulness, in this case, it could be, just being thankful that you even get to play the sport of hockey.
Yeah.
I know, go ahead.
I think you're going to say the same thing. That rings true for me. I think I've talked about this before, but I've grown up, my whole life was growing up in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Not a lot of ice hockey. Got into ice hockey as a love for the sport around that 2002, 2003 time. And just the fact that, like, I have basically been self-taught, but to just get the opportunity to play this sport, my knees haven't given out yet. They've tried, but they haven't given out yet. My health is still there. I'm so grateful that I get to, even on a just recreational level, get to continue to play this sport at least once a week, that I get the great exercise, the great camaraderie, and honestly, just the thrill of being able to go super fast on the ice and score goals. It's just a lot of fun.
Yeah. No, it's totally relate to that, because it's interesting. I don't think I told you this, Dale, but so 2-3 weeks ago, I did a hockey camp here in the Nashville area. It was 3 hours on a Monday, 3 hours on a Tuesday. I then followed that up with like some really aggressive open hockey later in the week. And then we had sort of like a scrimmage thing with our team that weekend. And I started to have basically what would be.
We had a game in between those 2 sessions too.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Like,
yeah.
we had a night game.
Oh,
in between
that's right.
Two,
that's right. I had that the evening of.
Yeah.
So long story short, so I'm 45 and my body has a lot of wear and tear on it. And by that weekend, after we did one of our team scrimmage things, my wife's a PA, so she can kind of diagnose me pretty well. But I mean, I was essentially having like an overuse problem in my left knee and feeling lots of pain. Just was getting kind of I'm not a hypochondriac, but I was getting a little anxious about my left knee, and it was giving me a lot of pain. I had a hard time going up and down the stairs, following all that. And so I literally just like took the week off and was basically trying to rehab it. And I ended up, after taking a week off, I had another hockey game, and it was very questionable during that game. It was still flaring up. Anyway, after putting some intentional sort of rehab into it and being very mindful to rest and listen to my body, it's kind of gotten back to 100%. I'd say it's probably right now it's around 90%. And so the other day, I was looking at my calendar and I had availability to do an open hockey session. And I was thinking, I don't really want to get up early. Don't really want to go do that, but I probably should. But I ended up going. And the reason why I went is I had to remind myself, going back to these feelings of gratitude, that for a moment in time there, I thought, is this knee thing going to put me out of commission? Like, am I hockey, not to get like super like panicky or anxious about it, but thoughts did cross my mind of like, is this the beginning of the end, right? Like, will I not be able to play the sport that I love so much? And so knowing that I'm healthier now and have the opportunity to do that open hockey session, there was something more there that it's like, go to it, Scott, like show up, because when there will be a day that I will not be able to do this again. And that day could be tomorrow. It could be a year from now. I'm not getting any younger. And so I'm very cognizant of not pissing away the days that I have that I can play this sport, because I know my time is limited. And so I think, whether you're a 23-year-old elite hockey player or you're a 30-year-old getting into men's league for the first time, be thankful that you get to play this sport, because your days, just like mine, are numbered. You could be knocked out with an injury, you could have some other health crisis that hits you. Maybe you have heart problems, who knows what. So be thankful. And if you can go back to that place, it's going to help get you into that more optimistic, positive mindset. I know that sounds very long-winded, guys. I really want to emphasize that point that just be real.
Yeah.
Like, be thankful that you get to play. I mean, it's as simple and basic as that.
Well, one thing I love about that story too that you didn't touch on is, think about if you hadn't gone out and done that session, if you had just stayed home. Yes, you would have rested your knee more. That's not necessarily a bad thing, maybe. But you proved to yourself that your knee was better by playing.
Yeah.
And if you'd stayed back, what could have been happening was that you could have fed into some more thoughts of discouragement, right?
Yeah,
Which kind of fits really well in this episode, that you would have been kind of, instead of just going out and proving to yourself, I can do this because I'm grateful to do this and I want to do this, you could have been stuck back at home thinking with your own thoughts of, can I do this still?
Yeah.
So yeah, just the mental advantage you just gave yourself on that day was great.
Yeah. And I remember during school, so when I was completing my MS in sports psychology, I remember having to write, not a paper, I think it was more like a short like research analysis, but again, me and my research and my memory here, I can't remember. But if I'm correct here, I believe there was a study done with the Minnesota Wild, and they were studying kind of the topic here that we're talking about, like control only what you can control, but they were basically putting a study on those hockey players of the Wild who were injured and had to go through rehab and bounce back, whether it's an ACL injury or something similar. And those that focused on only the things that they can control, staying positive, being intentional about recovery, that sort of mindset and that approach allowed them to bounce back faster than, let's say, other types of athletes, right?
Yeah.
And so I believe that the paper itself was like a study on grit or mental toughness, but it had a lot to do with what we're talking about here, that obviously if you get injured, you're going to get discouraged. But by practicing these things, having this sort of mindset, you can bounce back a lot faster.
I'm going to try to stay away from a joke that I thought you were going to go into Minnesota Wild fans and overcoming discouragement. So I'm going to try to stay away from that just because I just, either way. No, but I think that's great. And the main thing from this is that these positive feelings are going to help you act and think like a better player, right? Going back to our player that we've kind of been highlighting throughout this entire episode, Martin St. Louis, right? We left off that he had that he had signed with the Tampa Bay Lightning in 2000. This is where his career really took off. He found his footing with this team. like I said, I got into hockey, into really watching the NHL in like kind of 2003 time period. So after the Devils had won it in 2003, my first full season of watching NHL from start of the season to the end of the season was that 03-04 season. Great timing with the lockout season that came the next year, losing a whole year, but I won't get into that. It's another episode in and of itself. But I remember watching this Tampa Bay Lightning team in the Stanley Cup final, I believe against the Calgary Flames, I think it was.
The irony in that's interesting. Yeah,
I know.
Think
Yeah.
about that.
But that they went to win the Stanley Cup, and Martin St. Louis was such a pivotal player in that. And again, I mentioned earlier, I'm 5'8", so watching this player that's kind of the same size as me be a dominant force for his team in the playoffs was a lot of fun. Honestly, he played 23 games in the playoffs. He had 9 goals, 15 assists, so 24 points total throughout the postseason. And honestly, his career wouldn't stop there. Those who have followed him throughout his career would know that he has collected a lot of hardware over the years.
Yep.
He was outside the Stanley Cup that we talked about that he got to lift. He won the Hart Memorial Trophy as the MVP in 2004 in those playoffs. He won the Art Ross Trophy as the leading scorer twice in his career, and also the Lady Byng Trophy for best sportsmanship, voted on by the Players Association 3 times throughout his career. He was inducted as a Hockey Hall of Fame player in 2018. This solidified his legacy. He will go down as one of the greatest undersized players in NHL history. And think about that time that it started out with bouncing back between 3 leagues, and then he plays for the Lightning for like most of his career and finishes off with 2 great playoff runs with the Rangers as well. Just a great player, and he overcame that discouragement for sure.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely is definitely has a great story that embodies this entire topic, right? Of someone that, can go through discouragement, can go through hard times, and do all the right things to overcome it, which is should be inspiring. It's inspiring for me. Hopefully it's inspiring for you guys as you're hearing more about that.
Go 5'8" people.
Yeah.
that's the main thing. Yeah. Oh man. So yeah, discouragement, loaded word. We started it off right. Well, it's a negative topic, but the positivity that can come out of it from what you learn from it, it's great. It's a lot of good news because there's just so much that you can develop from discouragement, and also take these takeaways that we've gone over in this podcast to hopefully avoid discouragement if at all possible, even though it will try to poke its head in throughout life.
Yeah, I mean, it can be used as a weapon, right, against you, or you can use it as a weapon to sort of empower you to do bigger and better things. But you've got to channel it, and you've got to be intentional about weaponizing it to your favor by doing these 5 strategies that we've talked about. So actually, on that quick note, let me just kind of quickly break this down for you guys. So, yeah, facing discouragement, it's a sad reality, obviously, that impacts us all. So what can you do to sort of navigate around it, or at least manipulate it to work in your favor? We started our conversation here talking about setting realistic goals, right? So, yes, set goals, but make sure they're realistic. Make sure that they're achievable. Obviously, there are things like the SMART acronym. Don't need to go down that pathway, but just make sure you're setting goals that are achievable, that aren't going to be the opposite, where they're so lofty, they're so high that they're actually going to discourage you, rather than encourage you. Number 2, we talked about staying focused on the process, that as long as you can, big picture wise, do the things that you need to do and focus on the things that you can control, then you should be in great shape. And that's very similar to number 3 there, which is control the things that you can control. I know a lot of times we talk here on the podcast about the stoplight approach, red and yellow, things you cannot control, green, things that you can. So stay in the green. Learn from failure. That, Dale, as you jokingly pointed out, failure is a part of life. It's going to happen. But what makes the difference is that you can take those failures and learn from those mistakes. You can use that as a sense of empowerment. And then we can wrap up our conversation here with staying positive, that optimism, enthusiasm, gratitude, those are your 3 biggest weapons. They're the 3 biggest enemies of discouragement. So deploy those to work in your favor.
Perfect. And on a positive note, that's a wrap for episode number 7. We've now made it through 7 episodes. We continue to march along, even though I know we missed a week, but it's great to be back. Thank you all for sticking with us, for continuing to tune in week in and week out, following us online as well. We do, before we leave, we want to make sure to make sure we mention to you, to download our mental toughness awareness guide and learn how to become a more confident and fearless hockey player. All you have to do, simply go to gritbase.com/mental toughness to download your free copy today. We're also, like I mentioned, very active on Instagram and all the social media outlets there, and we would love to stay connected with you. We post daily about mental performance strategies for hockey players. Very easy to find us. All you got to do is just search for GritBase. That's at GritBase Hockey, and you can follow us on all the platforms. Well, from Scott and I both, we both hope that you have a great week ahead, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
You have been listening to the Hockey Combat Mindset Podcast with Scott Schwertly and Dale Dameron. New episodes release every Tuesday, so be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a rating, provide a review, or make a topic recommendation for a future episode. Thanks again for tuning in, and join us next week for another episode.